To use the Porter's Five Forces analysis to evaluate the competitive forces within the technology and consumer electronics industry, which is where Apple resides. So I'll go through each one, setting it up a little bit, and then perhaps you can speak in a little more depth to each one of these forces that's really impacting Apple. The first one is the threat of new entrants. That is low. There's economies of scale that's going on that Apple benefits from. There's brand loyalty that Apple really enjoys a very strong amount of, and high capital requirements by other companies to get in the space.
Yeah, and I think, so if you're talking about threat of new entrants, you're absolutely right about it is low. And I think one of the things that you see with Apple that has allowed them to minimize that threat is the ecosystem integration. So once you get into the Apple world, many of us have the watch, and then we have I mean, look, if they come out with an Apple car, I don't know, already got an EV, I'll probably have to get it, right? Because that integration, the idea of that seamless getting into my car and it's going to know my schedule and it's going to know all that. So these things seamlessly working together, this creates what we call high switching costs. So going from the Apple ecosystem into now, sure, the Android is out there and it's doing well. And those are the two big rivals, clearly, right? But you're not seeing anyone else getting into the space because that's been kind of carved up. So I would say that the ecosystem integration really acts as a barrier to new entrants. Absolutely.
How about for bargaining power of suppliers? I would say that it's moderate. And I've seen Apple use a very diverse supplier base, so reducing its dependence on any single supplier.
I think they have done a masterful job in supply chain management. And again, that's Tim Cook, he's kind of a quiet guy and not as flashy as maybe his predecessor, but where Apple really excels, I mean, they excel in many areas, but is the supply chain management. So you see they have a tight control over their supply chain from the manufacturing all the way to distribution. They have to do that because just like we were saying, like let's say the analogy is like you're running a restaurant and you have this star chef and they start you know, buying the most expensive ingredients that are out there, that's going to change your whole cost structure, right? So they have to minimize their costs. But as we know, Apple has a differentiation strategy based on quality. So they can't minimize the costs but be subject to low quality. So that's where they have to have a tight control. They're quick to react to problems in their supply chain. So they basically kind of own the whole supply chain. Not literally own it, but own it through their management process of how they interact with their suppliers, which a lot of them are in China. Now, right now, you'll see Apple is diversifying outside of China. We're seeing a lot of problems in China, whether that be geopolitical, the employment base, a lot of stuff going on in China right now. And Apple's realizing, hey, that's been our supply chain, basically, right? So now we have to look at develop some other supplier relationships. So I think that's very key. And also Apple keeps their inventory management very low. That reduces their costs as well. So I think they're really excel. I mean, you look at a company like Walmart and you look at Apple, they are like the king and queen of supply chain management, in my view.
Well, moving now to bargaining power of buyers, you say it's going up across the board. And I would argue that in this industry, it's moderate to high. Consumers have a lot of choices. And the premium pricing of Apple really forces them to deliver something of quality because there's a plethora of competition and great products that's waiting to take its place.
Yeah, I think one of the things that really protects Apple, and look, they've understood the sensitivity to price, and they did come out with a lower price version of the iPhone. But I really think they're competing on design excellence, and that really sets them apart. And I think what's happening is, Apple has always been, it's not just about the gadget that's in your hand. It's about your lifestyle. It's about your aesthetic. I would say that the design element, we were talking about Cirque du Soleil and what they did with designing the theater. Apple's like that too. This is a work of art. This is not just a device. This is really a work of art. And it makes a statement about who you are as a person. And if you look at, the 1 billion Apple users and iOS folks, these people have the most money in the world to spend. This is the most sought after consumer. And I think that Apple locks them in with the design excellence. Also, other things like customer service, they're pretty cutting edge on that too. I don't know, you feel like you have a concierge service. You phone up, the Apple support, you got a 2, 3 minute wait, and then people are willing to delve into things. I think that's huge today. I mean, who's not feeling overwhelmed with their passwords and their, getting in there? So you have that kind of concierge service. So it's really for like they've always positioned themselves as, hey, we're for the creators, we're for the people, the creative types. And I think in the economy that we're in, people want to be identified with that kind of brand name. So that's how I see them working with the buyer power.
Moving on then to the threat of substitutes, that's moderate. You mentioned it before. It's moderate only because of that ecosystem lock in, because there's lots of substitute products. But once you're invested in the ecosystem, it's really hard to get out of it unless you want to lose a lot of those apps that you love and information that you have on that device.
Yeah, there's that. And I think another thing is that protects Apple to some extent against, the substitute products is the product innovation. They're always coming up with something or two or three things that really can make you ahead of the curve, right? And people don't want to be left behind on that. They're considered cutting edge, and the field is changing very rapidly. I mean, I'm looking forward to some of the things that they'll probably be doing with wearables in the future. We're getting more concerned with our, monitoring our health data on a regular basis. And you kind of know that Apple's going to be at the forefront. And I'll give you just an example. When Meta came out with those glasses, the Oculus, kind of a flop, right? They don't have that design excellence. They don't have that reputation for being the cutting edge performance of their device. But with Apple, they really haven't had that kind of flop. They've had things that took a longer time, like the Apple Watch. A lot of my friends were like, what do I need it for? Eventually they came around and they got it because, you do want to have that interoperability. So I would think their product innovation protects them a lot from the substitute products.
And then the final one is competitive rivalry, which is really high, very intense competition. But really rapid technological changes are happening within this industry all the time. And you also have to worry about market saturation because unless you can move into new markets, you might have filled that void and there's not much growth that can happen in more mature markets.
Yeah, I think the competitive rivalry, they do a great job with this. And, they kind of own the road a little bit with these. And I think that's going to be broken down maybe with some antitrust stuff, but in terms of the App Store, right? Because if you want to sell your product, you got to go through Apple. So that gives them an advantage, 30% right off the top that they're making right there. But in terms of competitive rivalry, one of the things that Apple is famous for is their secrecy. This is a company lives and dies by their secrecy. And they're very secretive about their product development. Like nobody knows right now. Are they going to make the car? Are they not going to make the car? What's happening with that? Nobody really knows. And that secrecy creates that sense of anticipation, that sense of excitement. This is really quite powerful vis-a-vis competitors, and they stop people from copying their ideas too quickly. I mean, look at Samsung. They're so on it and they can come so quickly. I mean, they really do a great job as a second mover, but Apple makes sure they're not the first mover, generally speaking. I think the other thing that you see with Apple, they're a tech company. I mean, their patent portfolio is impressive. They have a vast portfolio of patents. Now, some of those they're not even going to pursue. They're just throwing off competitors with that. But they really are making that investment in terms of innovation that's going to be long term. So I think that puts them in a really good position with the competitive rivalry. But you know what? I'm sure Tim Cook's worried about it all the time because I mean, look what Samsung has done. And of course, the classic example, right? Going back to history, whatever, Nokia, right? Used to have 80% of the market. Now, they don't even really exist in that market. So I think everybody knows you can't rest on your laurels. And when Apple comes out with a new product, it has to be a huge moneymaker for a company that size. And so they have to really put their resources. And again, if I make the contrast with Meta and Zuckerberg, this is that $10 billion bet that kind of with the Oculus that fell on its face. And you don't see Apple doing that. They want to protect themselves in that way. So I still put my money on Apple for winning the competitive rivalry, I would say.